I am a second-year student at UCT, majoring in politics and law, and today I have the honor of introducing our next speaker. Advocate Ngukaitobi is a senior advocate here in Johannesburg, whose legal practice focuses on land and property injustice, competition law, and constitutional law. He attended the University of Transkei and graduated with a B.Proc and LLB. In addition to this, he attained his Masters of Law at Rhodes University and the London School of Economics. He is the author of The Land is Ours and Land Matters, which are books that focus on Black intellectual thought, private property, and constitutionalism. He has occupied various leadership roles, including Commissioner of South African Law Reform Commission and the Judicial Service Commission, as well as the chairperson of the Walter Sisulu University Council. Advocate Ngukaitobi's advocacy is recognized in South Africa and internationally at one of the most esteemed courts, being the International Court of Justice, in which he delivered his powerful argument in support of Palestinians. Today, he's here at Henley to speak about the legacy of inequality in South Africa. So without further ado, please welcome Advocate Ngukaitobi.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. So I think what we should probably try and do, I've got two videos. I hope to play the first one. The theme is on inequality. And I hope to have a conversation about what are the causes of inequality and what might we do about it, if there's anything we can do about it. You know, I looked at this program, it's actually fascinating, you know, like there's a CEO of this, and then the CEO of that, and then the CEO of that, CEO of this. Like, all of us want to be CEOs, you know, like who's gonna actually work? So I was like, yes, this is very, very strange. But anyway, you know, sometimes, you know, these things happen like this. Can we play? This is gonna be 2 minutes, right? Hopefully you haven't seen it before, and hopefully something you're seeing for the first time. If you've seen it, apologies.
A shrine to the man who led South Africa to freedom. A faded picture of greatness, surrounded by weeds, near the home where he was born. Nelson Mandela's hometown is not exempt from the growing inequality ravaging the country. Here, the decline of his legacy is felt the most. That's Mandela's home, and this is literally his backyard, but the taps are running dry, the crops are withered, and his vision for towns all across the country, like his, just hasn't come to life. And on the doorstep of Mandela's childhood home, where he's now buried, the loss is layered.
Yeah, we feel the freedom when he was still alive, but now everything is not good at all. We are living in poverty and unemployment.
For elders, the memory of the man they know and love still holds strong, fueling a deep loyalty for his party, despite its failure to uphold promises Mandela made.
Mandela promised us houses, and to this day we have not received them. We cannot build houses because our children are unemployed. We also don't work. The welfare grant we get is only enough for food.
Nearby, a mother of two washes her children's clothes with the puddle water they're forced to drink.
We drink with cows and pigs. I don't feel happy at all because we are struggling here. Yes.
Villages across the province have no access to running water, collecting what they can from these swamp-like groundwater puddles.
It makes us sick, and my son has a rash because of it. And he always has a running stomach, always.
She's a volunteer at Itemba Kuluntu, a community charity helping families in this village survive a lack of basic services.
How long have the taps been dry?
So it's almost a decade now. This cluster of villages out here outside Port St. John's is really the most forgotten network of rural villages in the country. And this is a systemic human rights violation. This is a major issue that goes back decades, and it needs to be rectified.
It's here in his home province that poverty runs rampant, and his dream for South Africa seems the most distant, where Mandela is buried, but can never truly rest. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News, Eastern Cape.
I thought we should start by talking about what we see here, which is people dying because of starvation. Right? In South Africa, a land of plenty, people are literally dying because of starvation. And people are drinking water in the same well as animals, right? And they don't even have the means of heating it up, right? Because there's no electricity, and the taps are there. They were delivered by Mandela, but they're dry. There's nothing in them. Now, and what this might be trying to show us about the larger socioeconomic reality of South Africa. And so that's why I thought, let's start by talking about inequality, and specifically what I refer to as structural violence. So this term of structural violence is not my term. I got it from a sociologist called Johan Galtung, who says that it's a phenomenon that occurs where some social structure or social institution harms people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs. It's institutionalized classism, ethnic discrimination, and racism, and those are examples. And then structuralism itself, and that is also something that comes from another academic, Todd Landman, who focuses on structures that constrain social actions so that individuals are not completely free to make their own rational choices. And individuals are embedded in relational structures that shape their identities, interests, and interactions. And these are institutional, they may be state or private corporations. And what they do is that they disable us from fulfilling our individual desires. So some start saying, so people will say to us, you can be anything you want. Have you ever heard that? Yeah, it can be anything you want. It's like, only if you work harder, only if you dream, And so we wonder because we've got the qualifications, but we don't have the jobs, And we wonder because we've got the ideas, but we don't have the finance to make all of these things possible, right? And so we all come to this meeting and we're hoping maybe we can get access to someone who can give us access to someone else. I'm like, why are we here? It's all of us are hoping that individually we can turn the city of Johannesburg into a city of dreams. The problem is that we are not thinking enough about the structure. In other words, the things that are constraining us from fulfilling our individual potential. We are all hoodwinked into this notion that somehow we are all going to strike it lucky. And we are always wondering why so few have so much and so many have so little, which is the true position of South Africa. And part of the explanation is structural violence. There are institutions that are constraining the individual ability to fulfill what we would like to fulfill in life. And those institutional arrangements are manifested in racism, right? We don't talk enough about racism. They are also manifested in classism. Don't talk enough about classism. They are also manifested in gender discrimination. We also don't talk enough about gender discrimination. So what this all means is that despite your own individual talent, the thing you were born with when you were young, despite that, you are still unable, to sort of make it in life because you are held back by a larger structure that is constraining your ability to fulfill your individual potential, right? So what then is the violent part of it? Because it's not just the structure. My conception is structural violence. Now, again, this is explained by Galtung, who says this occurs when resources are inaccessible despite their availability. So resources are inaccessible, but they are available. And he explains this by way of an example. a life expectancy of 30 years only during the Neolithic period was not an expression of violence, but the same life expectancy today would be seen as violence. And so the power then of the structuralist theory is that it points us to the importance of the state and non-state actors. They determine our access to resources, and therefore they constrain or facilitate our independent action. So we can make an example here. You've got a fantastic idea, you apply to a bank. And the bank says, well, we will consider your application, but we need to know if you've got collateral. This is all nonsense, really. It's just absolute nonsense. Why are you asking me about a collateral? Where do you think I get it from, right? But the bank says, well, we have the same rule, and this rule applies across the board, and we don't discriminate on the basis of race. And all of it looks legitimate, because if a white person applies, they say collateral. And if they have it, they get the funding. A black person applies, they say collateral. If they don't have it, they don't get the funding. The problem is that this is masking real racism, because it's forgetting that the reason a white person has collateral and therefore qualifies for funding, quote unquote, is because of history. And the reason a black person does not have collateral but has a good idea is also because of history. So what we are trying to look at is there are state and non-state actors that constrain our ability to act independently. And so the consequence of this, right, consequence of the structural violence that we are witnessing every day in society is made clear by a report given by the World Bank in 2018, which is examining South Africa, by the way. This is what it says, right? So did any of you vote in 1994? All right, some of you were not even born. Okay, all right. So no one here voted in 1994? All right, okay. Yes or no? Okay. Okay. No one voted in 1994. But most of us are familiar with the promise of 1994. The main promise of 1994 was equality. So we are all going to be like whites. It's like, Jesus, who wants to be like a white person? But anyway, the promise is we're all going to be equal, the same. But we then do an examination 30 years later and say, okay, how far have we gone in this? So this is what the World Bank told us. Firstly, it says 76% of the, for 76% of the population, poverty is a constant presence and a menacing threat to their lives. So for 76%, you are always at a risk of slipping back into poverty. Right? You are all sort of okay, but if they took a salary for 1 month, the following month you could slip back into poverty. If they took it for 3 months, I get kunzin. You know, so, and then they say, and then for 30% of the population, they are chronically poor. You know, so 30% is classified as chronically poor. In other words, they will never be able to get out of poverty. You know, that is what chronically poverty is. And then it says, and then an overwhelming number of those classified as non-poor. So in other words, if you are just above those who are chronically poor, you face the risk of slipping back into the chronically poor category. So you are sort of there, but there's always a risk that you will slip back. And therefore, 76% of the population are menaced by the threat of becoming poor or chronically poor. So that's the state of affairs 30 years later. This is a report of the World Bank in 2023. It repeated findings that were made in 2018. Right? It just showed that between 2018 and 2023, nothing had changed. In fact, things had become worse. I mean, all of you, I mean, I'm sure you've all been told, I know the problem is state capital, the problem is Zoom. You know, like, and we believe it. You know, like, no, the problem is the structure of the economy that was created for whites for the benefit of whites. Problem is that we have not confronted that problem. Right? We have lived with it since 1994, and we've inherited it. And we are finding it very, very difficult to dismantle it. So, and then we must take this analysis further, the analysis of the World Bank. So when people say, no, you know what, let me tell you my story. You know, I started this company from nothing, and look at me now. This is all nonsense. Unless you deal with the structure, we are unable to play in the same league. are unable to play in the same league. Right? Now, I am not arguing against entrepreneurship. If anyone wants to be an entrepreneur, everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. But unless you actually focus on industrialization, like the apartheid government did industrialization for whites, unless you focus on major industrialization. I mean, this idea that, no, all of us, we're going to be fine. Let's just have a small business here and a small business here. And then suddenly the small business is going to result in all of us becoming millionaires. So the World Bank says this is not going to work because it says we have a structure of the economy that has embedded white supremacy. So then it says, we take this analysis further, the analysis of the structure. So, well, race, gender, and income disparity explain the depth of the inequality. Race, gender, and income disparity. So if you're trying to work out who is the chronically poor and who is faced with the risk of slipping back, so the non-poor, but they face the risk of slipping back into the poor, who are they? You have to look at race, you have to look at gender and income disparity. And then it says Africans are at the highest risk of being poor. So Africans are at the highest. Now that's despite the education we have been given. Despite the education, we are still at the highest risk of becoming poor. And then children, large families, and people living in rural areas are especially vulnerable to remaining impoverished for lengthy periods. So if you are an African living in a rural area, you are at a greater risk of remaining impoverished for long periods of time. They also found that poverty is gendered. It's gendered. The incidence of poverty is higher for African women. It is also geographic. The 20 poorest local municipalities are where? Take a guess. Eastern Cape. Yeah, you know. And KwaZulu-Natal. Explains, you know, we had riots in July 2021. I said, no, these people from KZN, they like violence. No, if you actually look at the structure of it, the highest incidence of poverty are in KZN and Eastern Cape, right? So it explains why there is a correlation between the ability of people to uprise because of the socioeconomic conditions. And then this is another point made by the World Bank, and I'll stop now about statistics and figures. I'm sure you can read this on yourselves. It says, so we have this notion that education will end poverty, right? That's what we were told. That's why my mother sent me to school, and I didn't want to go to school, and I forced every day not to go to school. So now, because she was of the view that if she educated me, I wouldn't be poor. Okay, maybe she succeeded. I don't know. Like, I'm still not rich anyway. But the World Bank shows that education, of course, can contribute to poverty reduction. So one can never underestimate the importance of education. But it says we should also focus on asset distribution, because asset distribution is a stronger indicator of who is poor and who is not, right? No, more than education, right? It says, if you want to know who's poor and who's not, you don't have to look at qualifications. You have to look at asset distribution, right? And we know this, again, in our experience, because our universities are now producing more Black graduates than white graduates, right? But the Black graduates are still poor, and the white graduates are not. And then it says, for the poor, the financial assets represent 36% of total assets, while among the rich, the financial assets represent 75%. Right? Similarly, poor households have a very small share of mortgage in total liabilities, about 7%, while the rich, this share is close to 5%. And then it says ownership of financial assets features prominently among the factors that influence wealth inequality. So what this does show us is that unless we talk about redistribution in the economy, we are never going to resolve inequality. So anyone who says, no, of course, you must go to school, you must get educated. No, but that message is an incomplete message, because in the last 30 years, what the government has been able to do is that it has universalized education. Anyone who wants to go to school can go to school. The quality of education is a different issue. But you can go to school and you get fed at school, right? And those who finish matric and whatever, they also get NSFAS. So it's been very successful in universalizing access to education. It's a right that's enshrined in the Constitution, and they have done it. There are now more Black students than there were in the entire period of apartheid between 1948 and 1994. But, right, there are more poor Africans, right, like chronically poor, the underclass, than there were in 1994. And there are more wealthy whites, right, than there were in 1994. So freedom has been very good for white people. They have actually become billionaires, something that they did not have before 1994. And that's not me, it's their own research. It shows that we now have more white millionaires. So there has been a calcification, a consolidation. You know the book by Thomas Piketty, right? About capital in the 21st century. You know, the main thesis in the book is the calcification of wealth at the top. We always believe that wealth will trickle down, but he shows that wealth calcifies at the top. The same families that have been wealthy for the last 300 years remain wealthy today, right? So if you go to the Cape in 1652, and okay, a group of Khoi people here around, and then Van Riebeeck takes everything. Then after Van Riebeeck, there's Simon van der Stel, he takes everything. After Simon van der Stel, there's Adrian van der Stel, he takes everything. Their great-grandchildren will also be wealthy, because what has happened is that they've taken the assets and they've calcified the assets at the top. Okay, so this now explains why, despite the reforms in law, right, there are no reforms in the economy. And this explains why, despite the universalization of education, it has not been accompanied by a transformation of the economic ability of Africans. So it's the problem of the calcification of wealth, and that calcification of wealth in South Africa has a unique dynamic, unlike in Europe and elsewhere, which is the site of study of Thomas Piketty. Unlike in Europe and elsewhere, the problem here is that the calcification has also been racially biased, gender biased, geographically biased, etc., etc. So in other words, poverty has a color in South Africa. Poverty has a gender, and the face of poverty is an African woman. And what they also, yes, and so this hypothesis, now I'm done with the World Bank. I wanted to give you what the World Bank says about the state of South Africa, so that we can explain better the phenomenon of July 2021. And also so that we can explain better the political choices made in this election. People say, how can people vote for Zuma? What do they have to gain in this economy? Like, what do you expect them to do? They've got nothing to gain in this economy. This economy doesn't exist for them, right? So what do? They make irrational choices. And irrational choices are the product, the natural product of the structural violence that they're exposed to now. So that's what the World Bank does. What it does help us with is that it is explaining the failure of freedom. It's explaining the disappointment that we always hoped that things would be a lot better than they are. But what it is trying to do is say, well, this is how we have transformed, quote, the economy. Now, of course, according to Sambi Blanche, the book is called, I thought I would bring a copy, History of Inequality, 1652 to 2000. That's the book called 1652. He makes one point, and I want to make this point before I move to the next one. Sambi Blanche. So we've done the World Bank. Look at Sambi Blanche. Sambi Blanche says, well, inequality has calcified on racial lines. That's true. But that's not the full picture. There are a lot of Black people that are wealthy. Some of them are super wealthy, right? And he says that's been good because it's necessary to deracialize the stock exchange. So when you go to these companies that are listed in the stock exchange, maybe you want to see a Black CEO. I don't know. Maybe that's of interest to you, but you know, but maybe not. But I mean, a friend of mine, you know, we were debating Black economic empowerment. Do we need it or don't we need it, right? So a friend of mine says to me, And matter of fact, and you know, this is a friend, okay, I don't know how to say he's a villager, but he's from a village. I'm also a villager, by the way. Anyway, let's say a village friend of mine says to me, and this is a true story that happened. So I'm going on about BEE and why we need to make sure that the stock exchange also includes Black people, blah, 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 blah. It's a nice thing to say. He then says to me, Mfokaba, khawutsho man. Njengoba usithi kukho abantu abanemali, mna ndingenaphi kuloo nto? Now, to translate for those who don't understand Xhosa, he says to me, why does it matter to me that someone else is wealthy? It's a very, very, very good question. So if you empower, let's say Sakima Xhozoma or Tokyo Squale or Cyril Ramaphosa, he also got there and then he's now here, it's everywhere. But if you empower him, why does that matter to me? You know, because the structure of BEE is that one person gets empowered, but it's not about the redistribution of wealth. So what Sambita Blanche says is that the BEE has been important on its own right because it's deracializing. So in other words, it's symbolic. So we see some people there. I don't know what it does to us, whether we hope that we will be like them one day or what exactly, but we see some rich Black people. And then he says, but that has been necessary for the stabilization of the political order, right? Because if you did not have a few rich Black people, there would have been a lot of instability, you know, in the political order, right? But perhaps this was pacification, right? It was, you know, perhaps it was pacification, right? Perhaps the masses were being told, one day you'll be like that. And perhaps there was never the suggestion or the potential that actually there will be a trickle down or a real transformation of the wealth of this country. But then he makes the other point, Sambita Blanche. So firstly, he says, we should not be too critical of BEE because it was necessary as a program for political stability, right? We needed it in the transition. But he says, but the problem with it is that it has also resulted, so it's created a superclass. They are now like really, really wealthy people, like money, you just don't know like where it begins and where it ends, like something like that, like crazy money, you know, some money you've never seen, like $1 billion. I don't know if any one of you has had $1 billion in their account. I've never had $1 billion. Like, so money like that you just don't know where to begin and where to end. So he says that's been good. But then he says the consequence of it is that the super class, like the super wealthy, has also created the underclass. In other words, the desperately poor. You know? And the super class is non-racial. It's a combination of Black and white, right? And colored and Indian, etc. But the underclass is exclusively African. See, the underclass is exclusively African. Now, then the last of these figures, so I've got the World Bank, I've got Sambita Blanche, then the last is the Competition Commission report, 2022. So they also published a report in 2022. What they were trying to find out is they were trying to track what's happening to the economy, the concentration in the economy in the last, at the time, 2022, so they were doing it 28 years, the last 28 years. So the entire period of the democratization. So let's look at the economy. Has it been concentrated? Has it been opened up? So this is what they say, right? They say, when there is no competition in the market, the theory is that there will probably be economic practices that are harmful to consumers by higher prices and a diminution in the quality of services. Let's forget that's economic theory. That's not relevant to what we're dealing here. They say the findings make some interesting reading because they look at the data for the past 28 years. The industries with high levels of concentration include farming inputs, seed storage, fungicides, insecticides, fertilizer, agro-processing, grain processing, human and animal consumption, fisheries, ostrich meat, and leather. So one area with the highest level of concentration is what? Agriculture. What is agriculture? Land. Why? Because land is in the hands of white people. Right? They told us, no, don't worry, we're going to get your land. Let's do it on a progressive basis, etc. And I'm also a big supporter. I've always supported them. No, let's, these people who want to get this land without compensation, this is unrealistic. So agriculture is a highly concentrated area of economic activity. And that economic concentration is wide concentration. There are 76,000 farmers in South Africa. They hold 72% of all agriculturally productive land. Right? That's the reality. The Competition Commission says that's number one. Then look at the second area that's highly concentrated: alcohol and gambling. Right? I know my aunt who raised me, so my father died when I was a kid, like whatever, 5 years. So then my mother says, no, I can't look after you. Go and live with your aunt. So I go there. So Jesus, what's going to happen? But anyway, she was a shebeen queen, selling alcohol. So I was selling all of this thing, alcohol and cigarettes, etc., etc. So I always got this impression that if there's anything that Black people can sell is alcohol, because that was like my own experience. Because the townships are just full of, taverns and shebeens. And then it turns out that actually when you do a macro study, the alcohol industry is a white industry, right? And gambling, of course, and it's the same thing with gambling. I mean, there are all of these slot machines in the township, but actually it's white who control them. The third one is healthcare, medical schemes, medical administration, pharmacy. Fourth one is communications, Vodacom, MTN, Cell C, there are only three. Fifth one, take a guess, mining and finance, like the banks and the mines. Nothing has changed. Anglo is still the largest mining house, BHP, Billiton, etc. The banks are still Standard Bank, FNB, etc. So those are the 6 sectors. And if you look at these sectors, these are the sectors that define the economy. And they found that those sectors had not changed ever since 1994. Land had not changed, mining had not changed, communications had not changed, finance had not changed, alcohol had not changed, gambling had not changed. Right? So then where is the space for Black people to participate? Like, where is the space? Right? And then they say, so this is the first thing, they said these areas, in fact, what has happened is that they are seeing greater concentration, right? There is no deconcentration, it's greater concentration. Things are getting worse. In other words, white control is getting stronger in these economic sectors. So they also say, we are also told that employment will come from small and medium enterprises. I'm sure you've heard that here as well. Yeah, no. This is a big lie. And then the state should be focusing on this segment. But the analysis of the Competition Commission has shown that small and medium enterprises have greater entry and exit rates than larger firms. Here, these are the facts. They say. And the point made by I mean, of course, we can expect that an SME will have a higher rate of exit than a larger firm, right? Generally speaking. But here is the point that they make, is that South Africa's exit levels of SMEs remain high by comparative standards. So when they look at comparative economies. And then this provides, they say, evidence of higher barriers of entry in South Africa than in other countries. So you try to get in, they block you. Or you try to get in, they buy you out. Or you try to get in, they prevent you with not giving you input. Or by just not giving you a product at all. You try to buy it and say, no, it's not available. And so then they say, they have found that SMMEs generally exit in the first 3 years of entry. Right? So you've got no access to capital, you face high barriers of entry, and generally speaking, you are going to live in the first 3 years of entry. So I did, last year, I did a speech at the mining conference. And specifically, I concentrated on exploration. I asked the minister, Minister Mandash, I know the ANC now is complaining about these positions that people are saying must be given to the DA, but if you ask them, well, what have you done with these positions that you want to hold? You don't get an answer. Everyone says, no, they shouldn't be given to the white. But what have you done with them? Because you've had them for 30 years. I made the one point there, that it's very difficult for me to understand the entire mining story because the amount of money that is required for exploration is impossible for many Africans. Exploration is probably between 5 and 10 million francs, right? That's what you need just to explore whether there is a mineral, before you can even start mining. So I said the consequence of it is that of most Black entrepreneurs in the mining sector are paper entrepreneurs. What they do, they have pieces of paper, they can't convert those pieces of paper. Why? Because there is no access to capital. I made the proposal that if the government is interested in transforming the mining sector, it needs an exploration fund. And what an exploration fund will do is that it will finance an idea knowing full well that it's unlikely to make any money out of it. Now, everyone says this is crazy because it's wasting money, but they are yet to tell me what is an alternative idea, right? What is the alternative idea? Because if you are not going to finance ideas knowing full well, because that is the so-called developmental finance institution. You ever heard that the IDC, the PIC, and then there was another one, the National Empowerment Fund, blah, blah, blah. They say these are developmental finance institutions. I know one, which is not a DFI, but it's called a DFI. It's the Land Bank. The Land Bank in 2004, right? 2004, hey, the economy is doing very well, etc. They changed the law, right? So that the World Bank will lend against security. That's what is in the law, must lend against security. Under apartheid, the World Bank, the Land Bank never used to give money against security. Why did they remove the requirement of security under the apartheid? It's because they knew that it was a bank to facilitate entry. It's to facilitate entry. Now, Thabo Mbeki, okay, everyone says now it's very clever, whatever, he knows the economy. I'm not an economist. But under his government, they remove this requirement and they introduce the requirement that the World Bank, the Land Bank shall lend against security. Overnight, Africans are unable to access capital from the Land Bank because they are told that you cannot provide security. Now, everywhere you have gone, PIC, they say, okay, give us 5 years, for the last 5 years, financial statements. I mean, like, come on, So I made the one big point that we have to change the model in which the so-called DFIs function. Change the model in which the DFIs function. The one thing that needs to happen in mining, because that's the one thing I studied closely because I was giving a speech, is that we need a fund. And that fund must give Black people money. They must explore. If they find nothing, so be it. But if they find something, that is how, I don't know if you know the story of Cecil John Rhodes. Okay, tell you something of Cecil John Rhodes. He got money from Nathaniel Rothschild in order to start De Beers, and more money from Nathaniel Rothschild in order to steal the gold of the people of Zimbabwe, and cheated Lobengula, pretended as if he had signed. He knew he didn't sign. And then thereafter sent a lot of people to kill and shoot the Ndebeles, killed a lot of people. But that war was funded by Rothschild, and the gold production was funded by Rothschild. So there's no way that you think, okay, well, how are Africans going to do this? Again, another thing I said, I was speaking on the land thing this year, and now they get surprised they've got 40%. I said, but you didn't give Black people land. What do you think? But 40%, that is exactly the punishment by the voters. But the point is this, Jan van Riebeeck writes in his diaries, 1672, 1657, writes in his diaries. He says, we've got a problem here with a lot of farmers, right, who are deserting the company, Dutch East India Company. Why are they deserting? They are deserting us because they say we're not helping them to farm. We have to introduce a scheme to enable them to farm. The company then responds with a scheme. What does the scheme say? A farmer will get land for free, right? Where will the land come from? From the Khoikhoi, of course. Number two, the farmer will be guaranteed an offtake. Everything you produce from the farm will come to us. We will buy it. Number three, the farmer will not pay tax for 3 years. Number 4, the farmer will be provided free labor. Right? Those are the 4 things. This is how they started the agricultural economy in the Cape. How do you think it started? That is how they started. Now they say, no. We've given black people land. Look at what has happened to it. All of the farms are lying fallow. But you ask them, where are the fundamentals that are similar to what the whites were given? So what have I been trying to say to us here is that unless we actually agitate for structural reforms, right? This notion that somehow we are all going to get money from heaven and transform ourselves into CEOs through selling amagwenya is not going to help us. Not going to help us. It's really not going to help us. We have to be agitating for very deep structural reforms. The people that will do this is not the EFF, is not Umkhonto Wesizwe Party, is not the other one, Songezo's party. I like Songezo, a friend of mine. But it's not his party that's going to do this. It's the youth of this country who have education. This is why Mandela said we must go to school. It is so that we can transform this economy. And it's not the politicians that will transform it for us. It's not the politicians. This is why I spend a lot of my time agitating for inclusion, right? Otherwise, I would sit at chambers and go and argue this. Somebody said, was introducing me, say, no, he's argued a case in an international court. No one cares in my village. You know, they say, no, we like what we've seen you've done there, but you know, what can you do for us? And I can't answer that question. I can't answer that question. It's the most disempowering thing. I said, I can show that in my own personal capacity, this is what I've achieved. But Mandela was clear on this. In fact, not Mandela for that matter, my own grandmother, who said, no, we must send him to university, you see, so that he can be the torchbearer. You know, he can be the torchbearer. He can hold this torch for us. They were not sending me there for myself. They were at least hoping, but in the way things have turned out, yes, I'm now here. I'm not in my village. But the point is that we have a greater duty to complete freedom. We've got a greater duty to complete freedom. And what that means is that we are not going to achieve this by working in silos, you know, trying to be in this corner and trying to be in this corner and then looking, okay, this one has bought a Bentley. Okay, this one has bought an X5. Okay, a Bentley is better than an X5. So that, no, it's not going to work, you see. What needs to happen in many of these systems that we've looked at is that it's when the educated classes consolidate their actions and consolidate their ideas that you actually get transformation in the economy. So I've not come here to criticize anyone. I've not listened to any of the speeches, etc. But I've come at least to put a little bit of a reality check, that the freedom is incomplete. The struggle is nowhere close to finalization. These elections have proven to us the need for the deepening of the struggle. They've proven to us the need for the deepening. You cannot criticize the people for the choices that they have made, because if anything, this was a protest vote. It was a protest vote. So what the people are telling us is that we are letting them down. And they're not being let down by the government, they're being let down by us, because we are not providing leadership to them. We're not providing leadership to them that will transform the system, right? That will transform the economy. So I saw when I was invited in this thing, they said leadership. But that's leadership of society. Like, that's the leadership we need. We need wider leadership. And I don't have it, you have it. Now, 15, 17, I need to play the final video. It's 4 minutes. Hopefully, it will have a message, and I'll talk about that. Now, was there supposed to be questions and discussions? All right, let's do that now then. Let's do that now. Yes. Oh, okay. So many hands, guys. You know what? I think someone must just talk. You know, whoever wants to talk. And I hope this is not a question to me, because I don't want to answer questions. I just want us to have a conversation. Because, look, you know what? I'm in my 40s now. I'm not in my 30s anymore.
Just 30 years.
Maybe I wasted my time in my 30s. Okay, you'll play the video. Let's have a conversation now. It looks like no one is interested in the video.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Advocate. I just have a question. How can we balance the need to address individual instances of violence and discrimination with the need to address the broader structural issues that perpetuate inequality? My name is Molatelo Racheku, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, my view on this, it's a very good question, by the way, because it is something that haunts me as well. It's like, okay, well, okay, sure, whatever, you're now sitting there, etc., but how is that helping us? I think we have to work in organizations. And organizations doesn't mean you must go to the ANC. You know, it could be a community organization, and it could be even a business organization that you establish. But I think until we actually work in an organized format, you know, and we don't do it in sort of disjointed ways. So first thing for me is really organization. But the second thing is Steve Biko's thing, which is conscientization. We should remember what are we doing, you see, because for the most part, we actually have no clue what we're doing and what we're doing it for, you know. So my point is just to remember, what are we doing this thing for and what are we actually engaged? So my view is we're trying to complete liberation, trying to complete freedom, we're trying to free Black people, right? Of course, we're trying to free ourselves in the meantime. But what we're not trying to do, we're not trying to make money for its own sake. Of course, we need to make money. I mean, someone needs to pay for all of these things. But so I think you've got to do organization, and then you've got to keep the consciousness. I mean, for instance, you know, I speak to young lawyers. Yeah, sure. I do want them to be very good lawyers, but I also want them to be very conscious lawyers. You know, they must know the responsibility on their shoulders, the responsibility of freedom. But we can't. Mandela's done his job. He's dead now, but we have to take the struggle forward. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Advocate. My name is Dimagato Sowana. I'm a lawyer and I'm a civil society activist.
Someone is a lawyer. Yeah.
So I'm also a civil rights activist, and I think I've appeared on more shows on TV taking on the government, and I think by now I'm the #1 enemy of the government.
Yeah.
One of the things
I don't think they even watch television anymore.
if they do, yes. One of the things that we've kept on fighting about as a youth was the ennobilizing of urbanization, which I've said that the past 30 years of democracy have actually perpetuated apartheid into deeper apartheid. And nobody wants to address that. And we are sitting here in corporate spaces. And, you know, those of us who challenge and voice out the status quo remain silenced. We are sidelined for promotions. We have no support, structural support whatsoever, because we challenge the status quo. And now we look back into how ennobilizing urbanization has affected us as young people. I come from the villages as well in Mpumalanga, came here into Gauteng looking for the greener pastures. And unfortunately, the penury and deprivation of my circumstance has followed me into the urban cities. It has not actually left me. And now I have to come here, rent an apartment, which is 3 times what I could afford as a student. Now I'm working as a middle class, that has tripled. Then who does that coffers go into? It goes into the white minority of this country. Yes. You challenge that and say, I'm a young person, I have an idea. I go to the NYDA, fund me to create property for young people who are like me, coming from the villages. And somebody who has failed forward for 3 years, having even created a company, Shamira Holdings, that has failed dismally. I sit there and I said, what has this democracy done for me? It has done nothing. It has actually been eating itself alive. And now you sitting there, you have the opportunity of being in the council of higher people in the United Nations or whatever demographics that you find yourself into. Who gets to call the next generation of young lawyers who also have a voice and to challenge the status quo and say, listen to us, this has not worked. How do you then empower us? Because now the corporate is fighting us and say, you talk too much, you need to get out. And we're going to make sure that you leave our spaces because you are challenging your bread. And if we take the bread away from you, how are you then going to find yourself in an opportunity like this to hold a mic and speak your truth? So how would you?
No. Look, I agree with you there. I mean, you know what? The people I write about, you know, Sam, who started the ANC, was actually 32. Mangena, his friend, was 34. Richard Msimang was 29. You know, And the ANC then became a giant organization across, I mean, the entire 20th century. So these were all youngsters who started these ideas and they pushed for them. So you're still protected better by organization. But what I don't hear at all, I mean, you know, is the protest voice for young and educated people. But we don't hear that protest voice. Okay, you're talking about the NYDA. It's bankrupt. It's bankrupt. There's no money there. So you say, they don't give you any money. But we have to be protesting about that as well. I mean, you know, this is the point made long ago by George Orwell. Greatest duty of an intellectual. What is the greatest duty of an intellectual? He said that the greatest duty of an intellectual is to protest. Right? We are not protesting enough. The people that are protesting, by the way, were in KZN in July 2021. And we all thought they were crazy. But they were doing what we should be doing. Okay, so someone else wants to talk. All right, yeah, okay, yeah.
Yes, I'm Transkei. Ubandile, and I work for the PIC.
Oh, yeah, I work for the PIC. Confession time.
and I police these collaterals, and perhaps maybe in the defense of the PIC, again, you already lend to Black businesses, right? So I think there's a way that we want to conduct business in a way that it won't fail, and people will say, look at lending Black businesses. So we try to keep some of the establishment for risk control so that they don't say Black businesses lead to this. I think maybe my question...
You know, that word risk is very important. You know, especially when you use it in the same sentence as Black, eh? It's very, very, very important. Because it's a mindset. This is the problem I always talk about. It's a mindset. Black risk, Black risk, Black risk. Yay! Yes. Okay, uthini abandini?
I've got maybe 3 questions. I think one, what are the tools in law we have to fight this inequality?
Yeah, very good.
And maybe in your profession, how does this inequality manifest itself in terms of getting work and getting to senior counsel? Yeah. And then maybe to reflect slightly, I think you penned a judgment, a global judgment, which I thought was very reasonable. Yeah. But I found that it hurt a lot of my female friends, how that was read. And then now it's been overturned. Just maybe your reflections on the overall case.
Yeah. Look, the case that I would like to talk about is the case on land, given that I'm here on a topic of inequality. But let's talk about the first 2 points. The first one is what are the legal tools? And that's very crucial because most of the time it's really the legal tools we need for transformation. And at the moment, what do we have? We have that act called the Triple P FA, which is working on the 90-10 principle. That must be changed. I think that act is unconstitutional. I think it violates section 2172 of the Constitution. Because 90%, which one is functionality, which one is price? Okay. Who works on the Triple PFA? 90-10. Okay, anyway, it's price and functionality. But you end up not having any role for transformation. Yeah. But also the functionality part, I mean, even that I don't understand. Even the price part I don't understand. Because if you're going to introduce a Black person in a field that they were not previously involved in, there is no cost that you are putting in for the inclusion. Because the Triple PFA price and functionality, I mean, that is just unworkable. So I think the first thing is that that act must be scrapped. I think we need a new Triple PFA. So that's the act that was supposedly enacted to give effect to section 2172, right? The second thing is that, you know, the organization that is also not working is the Black Economic Empowerment Commission. It's totally dysfunctional. Because the number of cases of fronting that we see across, somebody takes their domestic worker, they take their farm worker, but they put it in a company, right? Fronting is so rampant in this country because we have a very dysfunctional Black Economic Empowerment Commission. So that also needs to go, and we get a new legislation on that issue. what has worked has been employment equity. Although the Employment Equity Commission reported last year that the biggest beneficiaries of employment equity are white women. You see, why? They are also previously disadvantaged. Like no one, okay, everyone thinks this is just, okay, anyway. But they found that they were the biggest beneficiaries of employment equity. It's white women. So there's something wrong there that also needs to be altered. So that's what I think we can do in law. In my own profession, there are obviously deep-seated structural problems. In the Johannesburg Bar, for the first time in 2023, the majority of advocates were Black. We breached the 51% mark for the first time in 2023. Not because the government has been helping us, but because we've been fighting the struggles of transformation inside, in organized forms. And of course, it has cost a lot of people, a lot of things. I mean, I can tell you, when I was a junior advocate, I didn't get government work. I did a lot of constitutional cases that were given to me by the EFF. I'm only getting government work now, a lot of government work. Suddenly everyone thinks, okay, he can speak English, blah, blah, blah. Right? But they never actually used to give me any work. There are also certain fields which were just the preserve of white people. I mean, I'm now a specialist in competition law. But the fact of the matter is that even there were barriers to entry, and then it took probably 7, 8 years of doing it over and over and over and over again until you get the recognition. There is also that element as well of resilience, of personal resilience. We keep knocking and knocking and knocking and knocking. I went to study in England 16 years ago, and I specialized there in competition law because I thought that is what I needed to do. And I was very naive, because when I came back to this economy reminded me that the most important thing is that I'm Black. So, and then only now am I finally getting recognized as one of the practitioners in the field. And even there, you still face so many of these stories, right? But you wake up, you go again and do it the following day, and then again you swallow the criticism and you go back and do it again and again and again. So one of the things that I have learned personally is resilience, is never letting external factors define what you want to do with your own life. Sometimes it works, but you have to keep doing it again. And you have to do it 3 more times if you are Black. Now, of course, my colleagues in the struggle for equality in the legal profession who are females, they say, oh, you're lucky you're a man, And of course, I can't speak for them. I don't relate to those experiences. But my job, perhaps even there, is to create the space. And most importantly, when they have arrived, to exit. Because we also like occupying the spaces and not exiting. They asked me the one day, what do you think the contribution of men ought to be in the struggle for women advancement in the profession? I said, perhaps it's to get out of the room. In other words, stop making yourself a stumbling block. And then they didn't like that. They said, actually, no, you have a duty to provide a helping hand. And that's what I've been doing now. I realized that exiting the room is itself a form of a cop-out. I have to be part of that struggle too. Now, I would like to talk to you about judgments, but I'm prohibited by law. Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Yeah, okay.
Good morning, Advocate.
Well, apparently it's
good afternoon,
3:30,
sorry.
yeah.
So good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Tembeka. I am a lawyer, but I'm also a legal researcher currently.
Okay.
I'm glad, Advocate, that you touched on the issue of financial institutions having some sort of attitude towards Black people where, in the absence of provision of security, maybe to secure funding for whether it's to study or whether it's for business ventures. But my question really is related to this issue that title deeds,
yeah,
they've been touted as some policy intervention to deal with this particular issue. So providing title deeds to even recipients of RTP houses, and even the issue of communal land as well, to being converted to land that can people can get title deeds for.
I know.
So I wanted to ask if whether that policy intervention is really a substantive one to deal with the inequality issue, or is it cosmetic one? But if it's really done and it's followed through thoroughly, financial institutions, would they respond positively to that as well, or would they keep on raising the bar higher for Black people who want to access funding?
No. Thank you. Perfect. It's excellent question. It's a lie. The whole thing is a lie. I mean, let me explain. It's really a lie, because in Joe Slovo, this is a practical example. It's actually in my book, Land Matters. In Joe Slovo, there was a big informal settlement, massive informal settlement in Joe Slovo. Then they said, we cannot lend you the money because you have no security over the property, and the only security we recognize is the title deed. That's what they said. The government then worked, it was still the ANC government in Western Cape at the time. The government then worked to transform the informal to the formal, to formalize ownership, right? They then went to the banks to ask for money. And they realized, there's a book by is a Bolivian economist, about informal titles. I've also cited it in my book. In fact, let me check for you, because everyone is educated here. So let me. You said you're a researcher. Thank you. So someone has my book. No, this is what you are raising is absolutely important. I'm going to get you the name of this fellow. And I'll tell you which. And look, I haven't opened this book in a long time, so I don't know where things are now at the moment. But the thesis that he makes is that he was looking at South America. So, well, in South America, there has been economic progress because of the formalization of title, and we should formalize title everywhere, including in South Africa. In Joe Slovo, what they found is that when they went to the banks to ask for money, the banks had shifted the goalpost. They were no longer looking for title. What they were looking for is income. They were looking for income, because what the banks are interested in is that you will repay. The banks are not interested in taking your property, because it's going to be impossible to sell. Who's going to take a shack and sell it? No one's going to do that. So the banks then said, no, what we want is income. So they suddenly realized that actually, no, this has been a lie, that if you converted informal to formal, then suddenly you will have access to finance. It will not work. And the second problem is that the title deed is an exclusionary document. So let's take, and again, I went to the department to talk about this thing about title. They had this scheme called Title Deed Fridays. They abandoned it. It was a crazy idea to begin with. Because what you do in those Batingo forums, it's the entire family that's given. Who is going to have their name on the title deed? Is it the father, the mother, the uncle, the brother, the sister? Who? So what they also found is that the title deeds were creating divisions within the family, when they were to be conferred. The same thing was happening in Ingonyama Trust. And they were not giving title deeds, that they were giving a PTO, a permission to occupy. And the question is, whose name will be on the PTO? Because once it is your name that is on the PTO, it gives you undue power over your siblings. And then you start thinking, okay, well, actually, this is my house. Now, the point I made there is that the studies in this country have shown that title deeds do not result in greater security, and title deeds do not result in access to capital. And there are more negative connotations of title deeds than positive connotations of title deeds. So the debate is a misplaced debate. The debate is not about title deed or no title deed. It's about security of tenure. Right? And we distorted the notion in South Africa when we introduced the Deeds Registry Act. Because that Deeds Registry Act, if you look at it like a pyramid, at the top of that pyramid is a title deed. But in South Africa, the problem we have is security of tenure. So the question is, how do we ensure that we have more secure tenure, which is not exclusionary, but inclusionary, right? So when I go to my village, I want access to my father's grave, regardless of who holds the title deed over that land. But I want to be able to go there and clean the grave and pray over it. So security of tenure, which is not exclusionary, but inclusionary. What are the rules on that? And in this book, I said we must abolish the Deeds Registers Act and actually find a mechanism that is more suited to African ways of living. And the title deed is actually a distortion. Now, it's been pushed, and I had a debate on Metro FM with one of the economists, I think Azar Jamil. It's been pushed by neoliberal economists, this notion that all you need is a title deed and you'll solve all of the land problems in this country. And it does not work. And Joe Slovo is a perfect example where I've researched it and it simply never worked. And they actually stopped giving title deeds because they found that they had lied to black people again. Always, black people just give them, it's a swap. So anyway, I wanted to tell you where this thing is. I haven't found it, but I promise you it is here. Anyway, it's a long book. A book which is 250 pages long, so whatever, blah, blah, blah. All right, any other points to be debated? I think one more point, or two points. Last question, all right. Doesn't have to be last, but I mean, I'm silly. I'm waiting for someone to tell me that I must go.
Okay,
yes, please, carry on.
thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues.
No.
My name is Nomgebo Giane. I work for the KZN Department of Economic Development as a Policy and Legislation Manager. I think my question is just also deriving from what the advocate has unpacked in terms of the inequalities in the fundamentals that are provided for whites and people of color. My concern or my request would be for the advocate to please kindly advise us as policymakers in terms of how do we approach then how do you approach developing and advocating for policies that actually speaks to the issues that you've just outlined that most leaders are not ready to talk about? Because in my experience or in my position, we've developed, and I think as South Africa, we are one country that has a lot of good documents or policies, but that are not actually speaking to the issues that are not moving us forward in addressing inequality, poverty, and in unemployment.
I mean, that's again is excellent. So let me answer that point. So it's page 135. The economist is not actually Bolivian, it's Peruvian. It's from Peru, Hernando de Soto. And he wrote the book called The Mystery of Capital. Sorry, thank you. I wanted to just check. So, apparently I must also sign. Yeah, after. Okay, well, send it up and the husband. Yeah? Okay. No, sorry. Send the hijack you. So, sends a lent. No, this point about how, we can do policies that, 29th of June, okay. So, all right, perfect, thank you. Now, are you from KZN? Yeah. Now, I'm doing work in that province right now around Ingonyama Trust, right? Biggest problem that we have there is, and this is very important for us to actually think about it. You know that at the moment, there is a dominant view that the land controlled by the trust belongs to the king, right? You had a former judge saying the same thing recently. It's all crazy. There is history to it. When Theophilus Shepstein began the settlements in Zululand, in his commission in 1846 and 1847, Native Lands Commission. In that report, he says that the land belongs to the chiefs. Why? This was a mechanism of indirect control. The British had arrived en masse in the Cape in 1820. Then they sent some people to establish a satellite province or a satellite colony, Natal. Natal was part of the Cape. People don't know this, but it was part of the Cape. When they sent people there, they found that the chiefs had too much power, right? And they needed to control the chiefs in order to control the people. But the chiefs did not control the land, and there was therefore a lot of independence among the communities. And the land in most instances was actually controlled by women because women were working on the land. So what they then did is they then conferred the authority over the land on the chiefs in order for them to control the community. So they would control the chiefs, and the chief in turn would control the people. And those chiefs who resisted were deposed, and new chiefs were appointed and created. From that moment on began the notion of indirect rule, which led to the Native Administration Act, initially passed in 1873, and then finally made law in 1927. In fact, in Zululand, it was only abolished in 1987. It's the Native Administration Act which then gave power to the chiefs over the land. They never had that land because in customary law, the land belonged to the community. It was held in trust by the chief. In other words, trusteeship is not ownership. You know, it's something you are holding for the benefit of someone else who is not you. Because someone needs to be able to make the rules of allocation of stands, etc. But the whites then converted the whole thing and said the land belongs to the chief. So you're asking me, what is the policy now that must be made in that province? Policy number one is to scrap the rule that requires the land to be owned by the chief, so that the land is owned by its true owners, which is the indigenous communities. That's number one. Number two, you know that, again, in that province, and I'm doing work there for the communities. Number two, if you go there as a woman to the trust, to a chief, Indun, and ask for a PTO, you know that you don't get it. They say, no, bring your husband. You say, well, my husband is dead. Okay, why don't you bring his brother? He is also dead. Why don't you bring your son? As long as you bring a male, then we will facilitate it. Policy number two is to scrap the requirement that women must come to the chief with men in order to get PTOs. You know that what they did about, we went to court for this, struck the whole thing down about 5 years ago. They introduced leasehold. They converted PTOs into leases. So policy number three, scrap the leases. See. Now, you know what they've been doing also? The chiefs have been working together with big business. So they come into trust land. They set up a shop, right? Shop in trust land. And if you are a community, you have a church, they demolish the church. They put a shop instead. You know, which on its own is heresy, but anyway, they do it. Put a shop instead, and then they take the rental. And the rental doesn't go to the community. The rental goes to the chief as the Kwanzaa fee. I think it's called it's a Kwanzaa fee. Policy number four, they must scrap that as well. So we can go on and on and on and on. Most of these things are facing us on a daily basis. We see them every day. I don't understand why the KZN government is allowing this to happen. Like, why are they allowing it to happen? Why is there no one in the government in KZN? The premier, not you, I have no doubt. If you had a chance, you would say that. When the king says, I own all of this land, why does no one go to television and say, but you're lying? The land doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the community. You are a trustee. And the trustee is not the owner. Now, if that happened, that would make a significant difference to the lives of ordinary people. Then there's a fifth problem, by the way, which is mining. Again, I'm doing work for communities there, threatened by mining. When a mining company goes to KZN, and mainly, you know, KZN is very rich at that area of Zululand colliery, very rich in anthracite. And anthracite is top grade of coal, very rich in anthracite. So what have they been doing? What they have been doing recently, they go and talk to the chief, and they make someone associated, either the chief himself or someone who's been nominated by the chief. They make them a shareholder. Make them a shareholder, right? They become a shareholder, they give consent. And then the community, for the first time, it sees the bulldozers coming, destroying the Rondavels, right? Or cutting down the mill fields. They don't understand this, you see. Because now there is a consent that's been given by the chief. So policy number 5, get genuine community consent. There's something else, this is the last point I'm gonna make here. The MPRDA, I don't know if anyone has considered the MPRDA, contains, there's someone here, contains a provision that says, I think it's section 106, that if a mining right is sought on land that is owned by the community will get preference in relation to that. That needs to change. Why? Because most communities do not actually own the land they live on. It's owned by the state because they were not allowed to own under colonialism and apartheid. So what we need to do is to move from ownership into de facto occupation. So if you are in occupation of the land and you are applying for a mining right, you should be treated as if you were the owner. I am doing the case, okay, I think the government has probably given up on that, the case of Kolobeni. The community sits there. Some Australian guys, they say there's a lot of titanium. The Minister Mandashe gives them the permit against the wishes of the community. And then he goes there. I mean, what is there's an English term people like, it's called gaslighting. He goes there to gaslight the community and says to them, I'm trying to help you, you're standing in the way of your own development, right? But if they change the law, that's section 106, so that that community is entitled to apply on its own, so that it's owning the mining right, and it's not owned by an adjunct of Minister Mandashe, which is currently happening. So you say, okay, what are the policies? I mean, we can go on and on and on. I am still doing this work for all of these communities. And the answer, so we can go to land, we can go to mining, so many things that are transformative. For me, what is important here is that when we are sitting here, we must have the conversation about taking the struggle forward. So if a policy comes to you, don't just pass it and say, okay, how does this now uplift my people? And interrogate it. You've got the power. Fortunately, you work for the government. I don't have the power. I'm outside of the government. I have to phone the minister or whatever. Sometimes, I have to phone my brother. Hey, can you speak to this MEC? He says, okay, I'm resigning tomorrow. Anyway, he didn't resign. He's back now. All right. Thank you. But all right.
I didn't think
looks
this
like they want to close now. Yeah. Okay. No, sorry. I apologize. It's me.
But thank you so much for your time, Advocate.
All right.
And thank you everyone for coming.